Okay, good afternoon, everyone. This is Audrey Russo, President and CEO of the Pittsburgh Technology Council. I am very thrilled about today. We're going to have Pete DeComo, and I'll weave in some reasons why I'm particularly thrilled. But before we bring him on, I just want to, thank everyone for being here today. I know this is going to be a great session, and I want to thank Huntington Bank for their belief in us right from the beginning. If you don't know them, get to know them. They're great business partners. And I also want to thank Jonathan Kirsting for all things media. He has been part of the Tech Council for 23 years, and he is, our actual storyteller. He is talking to people, writing about people, and making sure that everyone in Pittsburgh and beyond knows about what's happening here. So he will be monitoring the chat and throwing in some questions for Pete, because Pete has been a longtime friend of the Tech Council. So we've muted your mic so that you can hear, and we won't be hearing some background noise. I myself don't even have my dogs today, so hopefully they'll be quiet on this end. And I also want to say that we have a chat. So hopefully we'll have time to take some questions and enjoy, sit down, to have your lunch, enjoy this conversation, because I'm going to bring out Pete DeComo. And Pete DeComo has been, I just want to set the table just a little bit, because Pete DeComo has been an incredible friend to the Pittsburgh technology community for probably most of the time that the Tech Council has been around. And that's almost 4 decades, but Pete is not quite that old, but he has been around being an active supporter. He has been on the board of the Tech Council for many, many years. He was on the executive committee. He actually personally helped me through my transition of taking the organization over. And he was one of those guys that, while I did not know a lot of people across the tech ecosystem, Pete really made sure that I stayed connected and understand different ways of how the ecosystem was working, and actually helped with the vision of making sure that Southwestern Pennsylvania is an amazing place for people to build businesses. Pete himself has done that a couple of times, and he's now in the middle of a company called ALung, and we're gonna talk about that in a moment, and all that's happened since COVID. But Pete has an amazing background and an amazing perspective, and he is funny, he is warm, he has an amazing sense of humor. He is just been a stellar steward for this region. He doesn't have to live here, he lives here, and he's building a company here, and he's built another company before this here. So I'm gonna pass the baton and just say, Pete, it is so great to see you. It is so great to have this opportunity to talk to you. You know that I'm one of your biggest fans, and it's just thrilling to have you here.
Well,
so Pete,
I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, go on, welcome. Thank you.
I was going to say thank you very much. I'm not sure I deserved all of that, but I greatly appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Well, I think you do deserve it, because now what we're going to do is we're going to say, who is Pete the man? To give us a little bit about Pete yourself, because your actual professional background was not necessarily that of an entrepreneur, but you pivoted. So can you just tell everyone about that?
Yeah. It's I never thought I would be an entrepreneur, but as I look back, both my parents were entrepreneurs, and I didn't realize it at the time. Didn't even know the definition of entrepreneurship at that time. But they were, small town entrepreneurs, running businesses up a little bit up north, up the Allegheny River in Ford City, and they had a number of restaurants up there at that point in time, and they were truly entrepreneurs. And I delved into the restaurant business one time. I'll never do that again, but I should have learned my lessons from my mother and father. But I've grown up in this area. I've stepped away from this area a couple of times. I was out in San Diego for a while in a startup out there, and I was also in Indianapolis for a while with a startup out there. I became an entrepreneur about 25 years ago. But prior to that, I started my career here in Pittsburgh. Got my education initially at community college, became a respiratory therapist, then went on for my bachelor's and master's degrees at the University of Pittsburgh, and of course graduated from there. you know, it never occurred to me that I would come full circle back into the pulmonary medicine space with ALung. I'm one of those individuals and entrepreneurs that mostly takes advantage of opportunities that are presented without having a clear path mapped out for myself. What's interesting about my entrepreneurial career is that the last 3 companies that I've been with, without any pre-planning whatsoever, are all extracorporeal companies. What that means is that they've been in the medical device space, and they've been with technologies that take blood from the body, treat it in some fashion, and then put that blood back into the body. The first one was out in San Diego when I was chief operating officer of a company called Hemotherapies, and it was the first FDA cleared medical device for liver dialysis. So people that had liver disease and toxins were building up in the body because the liver couldn't remove them, we had a device that removed those toxins and then returned the blood back to the body. That was a short stint, and then I met my co-founder there for my next company, which was Renal Solutions, which was based here in Pittsburgh. And that company was a technology that was founded in an R&D house in near Purdue in the state of Indiana. And they asked me to found the company, and I said I would only do that if I could go back to Pittsburgh and take the company to Pittsburgh. So we founded Renal Solutions with my co-founder in early 2000, July of 2000. Brought it back to Pittsburgh, and that is also when the Pittsburgh Life Sciences Greenhouse was being formed. And we were sort of in the right place at the right time. And, to jump to the end of the story, that company was very successful. We raised $40 million in venture capital, and then 5 years later sold that company to the largest kidney dialysis company in the world, Fresenius, for $200 million. And that was a great journey, but the world was very different back then in terms of the ability to raise venture capital. The strategics out there that would acquire companies had a very different outlook. They bought or acquired much earlier than they are today, but a very successful company. And then a number of my investors in Renal Solutions became involved with ALung, and they asked me to come over to ALung in 2009 after we were acquired at Renal Solutions. And we were acquired by a $12 billion foreign giant, if you will, at Renal Solutions. And I had to spend a year in that environment. And being an entrepreneur is much, much different than spending your time in a $12 billion a year revenue company with lots of bureaucracy. So I couldn't wait to get out of there, and was very, very thankful that I could come over to ALung and help usher ALung along to where it's at today. A funny story regarding ALung is that some of my investors who recruited me to come over basically said, "Hey, Pete, this is going to be a quick turnaround. Probably 2 years at most, 3 years at most, you'll be out of here. You'll have another exit, and you'll have had a lot of fun, and you can finally retire." And it's been 11 years now.
I know.
It's clearly a sign of how times have changed in entrepreneurship, and how they very much changed for medical device companies, because the old cliche that it takes longer and costs more is clearly the way it is today. We've raised a ton of money at ALung. Fortunately, our investors are believers. They've been very supportive of the company and of the technology. And one of the reasons they've been supportive and believe in the technology is some of the accomplishments that we've achieved most recently, especially as it relates to COVID-19. So it has been a long journey. I think you can tell that from looking at me. It's, you know, I'll often joke when I talk to entrepreneurs at Pitt and CMU that I'm only 39 years old, and you can see what entrepreneurship has done for me. Yeah, but it's been a great ride. I wouldn't change it for the world. I grew up in large companies after my education, and learned very quickly that I was a person that enjoyed entrepreneurship, small companies, much better than I enjoyed large companies and all the bureaucracy that comes along with that.
Well, so talk about ALung. Tell us what ALung is and what's happened since COVID.
Well, yeah, you know, for those of you that don't know ALung, actually the device is in the picture right behind me here. Mm-hmm. And we refer to our therapy as respiratory dialysis, because if you're familiar with kidney dialysis and you saw a patient on our device, you would oftentimes think that they're on kidney dialysis, because there's a catheter here in the neck or in the femoral down in the groin area, and we're removing blood from the body and we're passing it through an artificial organ, in this case, an artificial lung, and then we're returning it to the body. And this technology was conceived at the University of Pittsburgh McGowan Institute for Regenerative Medicine in what was called the Artificial Lung Program. Believe it or not, it was conceived all the way back in 1997, 1998. So the technology has been around for a while, and yet it is still disruptive and very different and very much differentiated from any competitive technology that's in the space. And it's really the only technology that's not only been conceived of, but designed and manufactured from the ground up for a therapy that we call extracorporeal carbon dioxide removal. So our focus as an artificial lung is to remove carbon dioxide directly from the blood. And the reason for that is when your lungs are failing, for whatever the reason may be, and you cannot move enough air into and out of your lungs, you're then not removing enough carbon dioxide from your body, which is a byproduct of normal metabolism. And so we're an artificial lung that functions very much like the native lung that sits outside the body and removes up to 50% of the metabolic carbon dioxide that the body produces. Now, we never want to remove 100% of the carbon dioxide that the body removes, because that could be detrimental, number one. And number two, we want the patient to continue to breathe on their own and use their own respiratory muscles. We don't want those muscles to become debilitated from lack of use. And so we want that patient, for example, that has emphysema or chronic bronchitis to continue to breathe on their own. But there are times that patients need an artificial ventilator, a machine that sits beside the bed and inflates their lungs because they can't breathe on their own. And in that particular case, we use our device simultaneously with the ventilator. But the objective there is different. We're still removing carbon dioxide directly from the blood, but what we want to do in that case is allow the physician to turn the breath volume down from the ventilator, because in order to inflate the lungs with the ventilator, oftentimes very high pressures from the ventilator are used to drive that volume into the lung. And those high pressures can cause what's called ventilator-induced lung injury. Basically, you're beating up the very gentle tissue of the lung with high pressures from the ventilator in order to force that air into the lung. So our technology enables the physician to lower breath volume and lower the associated pressure, because you don't need as much breath volume when we're removing the carbon dioxide directly from the blood. So it's a remarkable technology, and I can tell you as a respiratory therapist that worked at the University of Pittsburgh Medical Center for 15 years in critical care and took care of patients on mechanical ventilation. It's a remarkable device in terms of avoiding the ventilator totally or minimizing the need for the ventilator once the patient is on the mechanical ventilator, and then protecting the lungs while the patient is on the mechanical ventilator. So we're a small company. We produce small volumes of our technology. But since we started to treat humans back in 2014, we've treated 1,100 patients worldwide. We've been all over Europe, Latin America, the Asia Pacific, as well as in the United States. And for a new technology out of the box, we've not had one unanticipated serious adverse event associated with our technology. And so what we're doing now is working with the FDA to have our technology approved here in the United States.
Wow. So, well, what has changed? Anything changed since COVID-19? Like just the for ALung, the demand, anything?
A lot has changed. You know, a lot has changed. A lot of doors for many companies, not only in the medical device space, but also in life sciences in general. A lot has changed due to COVID-19. Many companies have been affected adversely, especially revenue generating companies have been affected adversely with COVID-19, especially if their product lines have nothing to do with treating COVID-19. So for us in particular, we're not a revenue producing company, we're still pre-revenue, so it did not have that negative impact on us. But it had a tremendous negative impact on us and closed the door, if you will, on a very important clinical trial that we were conducting here in the United States that would have led to approval of our technology here in the United States. And it's not just our clinical trial. The great majority of clinical trials being conducted here in the United States were basically halted as a result of COVID-19 because the hospitals were consumed with taking care of COVID-19 patients, and clinical research personnel were considered unessential and sent home. And so as a result of that, our clinical trial back in March of this year, of 2020, basically came to a screeching halt. We've enrolled a few patients since March, maybe 5 or 6, but not many. And the clinical trial had a target of enrolling 180 patients. We basically stalled at 93 patients, so we're about halfway through the trial. And we couldn't conduct the trial. So we needed to pivot, to be honest with you. And, you know, I often use a quote by Alexander Graham Bell, you know, that sometimes one door closes, but another door opens, but we spend so much time focused on the door that closes, we don't recognize the door that opens. Right. And so what that really means is when you're confronted with things like COVID-19 that affect your company, you do need to pivot. And so I went to the FDA and I said, well, 2 things have happened here. First of all, we can't conduct a trial. And if we can't conduct a trial, we can't raise money because no investor is going to invest in a company that has an uncertain future in terms of when it's going to be approved for the US market. But perhaps more importantly than that, we can help with COVID-19. COVID-19 manifests itself in respiratory failure. It's a syndrome called acute respiratory distress syndrome, or ARDS, A-R-D-S. And we just concluded a 412 patient trial in the United Kingdom on ARDS. We had a lot of good experience there. So we petitioned the FDA for what's referred to as emergency use authorization. And the FDA turned that around pretty quickly, within 30 days, and granted us emergency use authorization to treat COVID-19 patients. And so a small company, we can't treat the world with our technology. We don't have enough of it. But we've treated 42 COVID-19 patients worldwide, 36 here in the United States, and 6 in the United Kingdom and Ireland. And the reason for the United States and the UK and Ireland is that's where we had our major presence. We were already installed in clinical trial sites in those countries. We had hospitals and hospital personnel already trained in those countries and in those hospitals. and they could turn around pretty quickly and start to treat COVID-19. So we're in very prestigious hospitals here in the United States, University of Texas Heart Institute, Memorial Hermann, Minneapolis Heart, Tufts University up in Boston, LSU in Louisiana, and I could go on. And all of those institutions are treating COVID-19 patients with our technology. In addition to that, in addition to our clinical trial sites, we have allowed 10 additional hospitals that weren't our clinical trial hospitals to treat these patients on an emergency use basis as well. Now, one of the features that I want to point out about our technology is that it's designed to be very simple to use. That's very unusual for a device that touches blood, removes blood from a body, and then treats it and puts it back, but it is very simple to use. There are similar devices, but they can only be used in academic medical centers where you have specialized personnel like perfusionists that can use them, and not every hospital has a perfusionist. So in the UK, there are only 5 of those hospitals. In Germany, maybe 100. In the United States, maybe 300. Our technology is designed to be used in any intensive care unit. So it's really targeted for the thousands of hospitals that exist worldwide, especially in Europe and in the United States, places like Japan, for example. And the biggest compliment we get is it's a set it and forget it type of technology where the nurse can take care of the patient and not necessarily have to pay attention to the technology. And so one of the hospitals treating COVID-19 is a hospital in Florida called Palm Beach Gardens. It's a small community hospital that had a flood of COVID-19 patients because it's just north of Miami, which was a hotbed for COVID-19. They're our largest user, and they have no extracorporeal therapy experience whatsoever. We trained them virtually because they would not permit us into the hospital due to COVID-19. And I'll tell you a little story. They called us, they said, we have all these COVID-19 patients. The specialty hospitals won't let us transfer them in. We need a technology where we can treat these hospitals. And they said, we have this patient who's a physician who was treating COVID-19 patients that contracted COVID-19, was in critical condition. How soon could you get a machine there? Now, we typically ship them by freight here in the United States. But 2 of our technicians, very dedicated employees of ALung, put 2 of these machines in a van, left on Sunday morning and arrived in Florida. They drove straight through, taking turns, took them 17 hours. They had the technology there 10 a.m. Monday morning, and that patient was on therapy at 1 p.m. Monday afternoon. That patient was in a coma for 87 days, and the hospital released a great story, a video story that was on all of the local news stations in that geographic area about the patient being discharged from the hospital and wheeled out of the hospital. The brother of the patient said, if it weren't for the Hemolung technology from Pittsburgh, my brother would have been dead. We were making funeral arrangements for him. And so it was just a great story for us, and certainly we used it. We had another patient in the United Kingdom as an example that the hospital requested that the patient be transferred to a specialty hospital. The specialty hospital said, we won't take him due to futility, meaning that the patient most likely was going to die in their eyes. They requested our technology. We rushed it to that hospital. They treated the patient for 6 days. That patient was eventually discharged as well and went home. That was published in a peer-reviewed journal as a case study, so we're very proud of that one as well. Now, I don't want to give you the impression that our technology is a panacea for COVID-19, because it certainly isn't. These patients are critically ill, and about 50% of them die anyway, regardless of what you do. But what we do with our technology is we enable the physician to have more time to treat these patients medically while we're supporting the lungs. And by giving that physician more time, we hope to increase the probability of success in terms of the patient surviving COVID-19 or ARDS or COPD, whatever the underlying cause is for that respiratory failure.
So how do we help you get more of these out into the world, into the United States, is anything being used in Pittsburgh?
Oh, yes. Well, you know, it's no secret that UPMC is an investor in us.
Okay.
We have treated, not COVID-19, but we've treated 2 emergency use patients at UPMC Presby successfully. But UPMC cannot be one of our clinical trial sites because they are an investor, and that's a conflict of interest. But Allegheny General on the north side is one of our clinical trial sites, and one of our best clinical trial sites in terms of its utilization of our technology. I think they rank number 3 of all of our clinical trial sites in terms of the number of patients that they have treated. And they've not used it yet on COVID-19, but they have the ability to use it on COVID-19 should that patient that requires our technology present. So yes, we're right here in the Pittsburgh area. The other hospitals that we're close to Pittsburgh. We're at the Cleveland Clinic. We're at Ohio State University. We're at 2 hospitals, Penn and Temple in Philadelphia as well. So we're kind of surrounded, but the only one in the local area is Allegheny General Hospital.
So what do you think? You know, we had Paul Mango on a few weeks ago from Operation Warp Speed. And, you know, they've really educated a lot of us about, you know, the process of using medical, you know, trials, et cetera, safety, efficacy. Do you think that the FDA has learned through COVID that the movement, you talked about the 30-day turnaround that you received, do you think that this will help accelerate the pace of, you know, innovation and technology, particularly in medical devices?
Yeah, I think the FDA has learned. It'll never be the perfect organization. It's a large and bureaucratic governmental agency, and I think with that, you know, it presents challenges in terms of getting through the FDA. I will tell you that the FDA has changed dramatically in the last 3 to 4 years prior to the way in which it was operating you know, prior to that. And I tend to be apolitical on these things, but the FDA does go in terms of peaks and valleys in terms of how difficult it is to work with. So for example, at Renal Solutions, life was a lot easier with the FDA. And then when I came to ALung, it was very, very difficult for a period of time to work through the FDA, as evidenced by a very, very cumbersome and onerous clinical trial protocol that the FDA forced us into. But over the last 2 to 3 years, the FDA has been very collaborative and been very compromising relative to getting innovative technologies to market sooner. So one of their programs is called the Breakthrough Device Program.
Right.
And when you're designated as a breakthrough device, you get an FDA team assigned to you. And we are designated as a breakthrough device. And so that's been very helpful to us. And we've had the same team associated with us for the last 5 to 6 years. They know us very well. Okay. We've established a great deal of credibility with them, and it's worked to our benefit. And most recently, you know, I mentioned that we because of COVID-19, we had to pivot. Well, one of the ways we pivoted was emergency use authorization. The other way we pivoted was to go back to the FDA, and I had a very frank conversation and said, look, we can't finish this trial. No one can finish a trial in this environment. Patient screenings are very low, patient enrollments are very low. It will take years and hundreds of millions of dollars to complete a trial in the world we live in today. And no investor is going to invest in that. And so we had a discussion with the FDA and said, look, as a result of our breakthrough device, there must be a program available to us that would accelerate your review and our approval to go to market. We are classified as the most risky device under FDA. There's class 1, class 2, class 3. We are a class 3 device, which typically requires what's called a pre-market approval trial, a PMA trial. That typically results in a very large number of patients that need to be run, which takes multiple years and millions of dollars to complete. And as I said, I told the FDA we can't do this any longer. Our investors are tired. We have no end in sight relative to finishing this trial. And that means the company and the technology is dead in the water. And as evidenced by treating COVID-19 patients, the FDA recognizes that this is a novel device, a novel therapy, and is justified in giving it breakthrough device designation. The FDA, in very short order, reclassified us as a class 2 device, down from a class 3. And we are now working with the FDA on what's called a de novo 510K, which is less burdensome and less onerous than a PMA pathway. What it really means in terms of timing, everyone, is that under the prior classification and conducting a PMA trial, we likely would have not gone to market or been approved to go to market under the best of circumstances until mid-2023. Under the de novo 510K process, which we're working with the FDA on right now, we project that we'll have approval to go to market in mid-2021. So it's reduced our time to market by as much as 24 months. And that is a significant time savings and cost savings for all of our investors. And so that's sort of evidence that the FDA recognizes that it needs to get novel technologies to market sooner and is working with putting programs in place that enable that to happen.
Well, Pete, as everyone can hear, you are just a bundle of information and you are doing work that's really changing lives. You have spent a lot of your career also being an active member of the community in entrepreneurship and innovation, along with the Life Sciences Greenhouse and the Tech Council and venture capital. So, you know, hopefully these next 2 years will bring some acceleration. Your work is so important. If people want to reach out to ALung, we put the link out there. I know there were a couple of questions that we didn't get to, but I want to be sensitive to time. Pete is an amazing human being who deeply cares, and you can tell that his priority is to get ALung into a place where it really gets out into the world and scales. So I want to thank you, Pete. I'm glad that you never stayed working for large companies. You probably would have been fired time and time again. Yeah. And you being an entrepreneur is inspirational and aspirational for all of us. So I want to thank you for taking the time. I know time is precious to you. I really want to thank you for spending time with us and being such a good egg.
Well, Audrey, thank you for all the compliments. It's been a pleasure to be with you here today, and hopefully we can get through this pandemic and start to see each other personally again.
Great.
And for all of you that dialed in to listen today, thank you very much for your time, and please stay safe out there. We don't want to see you on our machine.
No, no. Thank you, everyone. Jonathan, who do we have tomorrow?
Tomorrow we have Ryan Green from Gridwise stopping by to talk about his platform and just trends in general when it comes to ride sharing and delivery technology platforms.
Awesome. All right. Thanks, everyone. Stay safe. Thank you again, Pete.